So yeah, thank you to everyone for coming, even though it's August time and everyone's on summer holidays. We're very pleased today to have Sheila Kanani come and join us. I've just got a little bio. You've got a very good Wikipedia page and online resources to put this together. So yes, Dr. Sheila Kanani is a planetary physicist, science presenter, secondary school physics teacher, space comedian and published author with a background in astrophysics and astronomy research from UK universities. She regularly acts as a science ambassador, visiting schools and speaking at events. Sheila has also published multiple children's books, and her book, How to Be an Astronaut and Other Space Jobs, was shortlisted for the Blue Peter Book Award. It's also a fan favourite from my nieces, who's got the book too. Sheila has been the Education Outreach and Diversity Officer at the Royal Astronomical Society since 2014 and is also an honorary researcher at Lancaster University. Last but certainly not least, Sheila was awarded an MBE in the New Year's Honours List 2022 for their services to astronomy and diversity in physics. So Sheila, I'll hand over to you for your seminar and then we'll have questions at the end.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. So I'm going to give a bit of an overview of the equality, diversity and inclusion initiatives at the Royal Astronomical Society. And it'll be a bit of a whirlwind. So if there are any questions that you think of afterwards, there's my kind of contact details. And apologies to any of you who I've seen recently, because a lot of this will be repetition from various talks I've given at conferences and things quite recently. So you can switch off during those times. So for those of you that don't know, the Royal Astronomical Society, well, you probably do all know, because the Miss community were based in London, formed in 1820, been at Burlington House since 1847, something like that. Celebrated the bicentenary in 2020, albeit a bit differently to how we expected to. And historically, it was a men's club. And when I'm talking to young people, I tend to show pictures of past presidents. So the bottom left picture is William Herschel, and the third president ago was Mike Cruz there. And I show those two pictures together to emphasize the fact that the face of astronomy hasn't changed that much in 200 years, and even Mike and William Herschel have the same haircut. But over the years, things have been changing. We got a new logo, which was part of our bicentenary celebrations. That's not great in terms of EDI, but it is kind of more modern thinking. And then we had Emma Bunce as our COVID president, unfortunately, although she did a huge amount of work in the 2 years over the COVID pandemic. So the face of astronomy is changing somewhat. And our current president is Professor Mike Edmonds down in Cardiff, who does acting sessions as Sir Isaac Newton now and again, not William Herschel. But yeah, so the RAS has got a very long standing history, some of it which gets in the way of change and some of it means that we're very progressive. The sort of most significant thing in terms of me at the RAS was that they'd never had an EDI officer before. I do cover outreach and education as well, so it's quite a varied role, and it doesn't leave me much time for EDI specifically, particularly because I'm also part-time now as well. But it is all kind of positive changes. It's in steps in the right direction. So women weren't allowed to be part of the RAS formally until 1916. So we did celebrate the centenary in 2016 with a photographic exhibition of RAS women fellows. There has been a Women in Astronomy and Geophysics Committee, which changed to the Committee for Diversity in Astronomy and Geophysics some years ago. Try and meet twice a year, and the constitution of that committee is council members, fellows and some other co-opted members like diversity officers from the Institute of Physics, and we try and work with some of the other learned societies as well. So CDAG's CDAG's purpose is to make sure that everything that the society does is inclusive, diverse, and promoting and fostering a vibrant A&G community. That's within the staff, the fellows, fellows and members, council committees, and at conferences. We're trying to do this in lots of different ways, trying to embed diversity and equality into the working practices of the RAS. We try and use data as much as we can to steer our work, and try and promote an inclusive working environment. And that again is for staff and members and beyond. I work sort of, I do the operation side of things as in my role, but I work underneath the committee, and then the committee advise council. So it's that sort of old-fashioned hierarchical structure, and we support all the large and small scale projects that address any diversity issues identified. One of the main or most important things we do is working with groups with similar aims. So I do work a lot with the Institute of Physics and similar organisations, because I am one person in a relatively small society, and partnerships are a good way of doing more for even if we're limited in terms of resources. Our fellowship, we have surveyed the fellowship a few times. There's recently been a demographic survey of the community, but our last membership survey was some years ago now. We're planning to repeat that next year. But the sort of statistics were about 5,000 members in the UK and internationally, about 20% women, majority on the older scale in terms of age. And we didn't look too deeply in terms of career stages and career breaks and things like that, because it was quite an old-fashioned and dated survey back in 2014. But when we delve a bit deeper next year, we will have a better picture of our members for things like this as well. So there's been lots of outcomes since 2014, and the reason that I keep harking back to 2014 is because that's when I started, and my job was sort of a brand new role. The education and outreach part was created partly because they needed somebody to be a staff lead for the RAS 200 project, and I'll talk about that a bit more later. The RAS appointed a council diversity champion around that time. We also signed the Science Council Diversity Declaration, and have been using a lot of resources from the Science Council, for example, the Inclusion Progression Framework as a benchmarking tool. We've implemented a diversity and inclusion policy, codes of conduct for the RAS and for RAS events and conferences, and we've written safeguarding policies for the education and outreach work we do. So before then, we didn't have any of those things. A lot of the diversity work was relatively new to me. I'd had an academic background, and then I trained to be a teacher before starting at the RAS. So the diversity work was not my expertise, but I've been on lots of training and attended lots of conferences and worked with lots of other diversity focused people since then to build up what I can offer. Working as the RAS 200 staff lead has been really important, and I'll show you some of those projects in a moment. We've been trying to work a lot with specific organisations to meet the diversity needs. So we bring in the expertise in terms of the astronomy and the geophysics, but we work with organisations to target the particular groups that we want to work with. So for example, a few years ago, I did a project with a London-based organisation called Generating Genius, which works specifically with Black and minority ethnic students. We created the LGBT plus Physical Sciences Network with the Institute of Physics. We've been doing more specific diversity work within our conferences. So for example, our National Astronomy meeting and with the UK SEDS teams. We used to hold a lot more one-off events, like we did a Hidden Figures cinema screening, which was targeted to age 12 or year 8 Black students, Black female students particularly and we held it in London, in Leicester, and in Liverpool. But we've been doing fewer one-off events in the more recent years, because in terms of impact, we've found that those one-off events are lovely on paper, but for longer term impact, we need to do different types of events and projects to reach more people and have greater impact. And we have tried to do things like e-mentoring and peer mentoring, but that hasn't always, well, we haven't quite got that off the ground yet. We've tried to have specific focuses for each year so that we're not spread too thinly. And for example, in 2020, the specific focus was carrying out a bullying and harassment survey, and I'll show you some data from that in a moment. So the LGBT plus Physical Sciences Network started in 2016, led by the RAS and the Institute of Physics, expanding to the Royal Society of Chemistry a year or two later. The network supports people in that community and allies. There's a steering group made up of members from the different academic organisations, and we have contributions and suggestions from the members of the network as well. We do things like encourage and support other organisations and conferences like the LGBT plus Seminar, and we have Twitter campaigns and well, X campaigns for things like LGBT STEM Day. We also ran a climate survey, which was the first ever survey for working, teaching and studying for LGBT plus physicists, astronomers and chemists, and those in related science and jobs. So over 1,000 people responded. The report and the findings was launched in 2019, and the committee and steering group are working towards repeating that survey in 2024. And the whole report is on our website, the IOP and the RSC website, and highlights all the data and things. But I just wanted to show you quickly how it was formatted in terms of actions and recommendations for different organisations, employers and individuals. So there was there's different boxes at the back of the document, split into those 3 areas. So things that you can do to actively be a better ally for the LGBT plus community and work, make your organisation more inclusive. And some of them are quick wins, and some of them a lot more long-term actions, particularly for employers and learned societies. So those are some of the positive outcomes from that survey. Focus during COVID was, well, off the back of Black Lives Matters, was looking at Black and minority ethnic astronomers and geophysicists. And we did different things. So we called out to particularly looking for members from the Black community to get involved in our decision making. We used some of the recommendations from a paper written by Ben Fernando and colleagues at Oxford University. We have started to look at awards and grants applicants and winners, particularly working with the MIST Awards Task Force as well. And we've tried to showcase Black astronomers and geophysicists in our Astronomy and Geophysics magazine, and in other, a lot more visibility in other avenues. So for example, we did things like showcasing Dr. Okeye, who was the first Black African astronomer to get a PhD in radio astronomy, and Dr. Alexander, who worked on NASA's Galileo mission to Jupiter, passed away in 2015. RAS 200, I mentioned a couple of times. So it was a bicentenary project that was conceived in 2013, when the RAS realised that they had a surplus of £1 million in some vault in the loft, or something, not in cash obviously, and wanted to use that money to commemorate the RAS at 200 with some grassroots outreach and engagement projects. So the 2 rounds of funding, we ended up funding 12 different projects. They were supposed to be 5-year outreach and engagement projects, but ended up almost as a 10-year project in total because of the pandemic. We had 150 just over 150 applications. The 12 winners were really varied in terms of diversity. So we were working with prison inmates, we were working with carers, we were working with adults who didn't have the opportunity to study things like astronomy and geophysics the first time round. The people we were working with were geographically spread. We had 10 projects in the UK, one in Ireland, one in South Africa, and we had projects in Scotland, Wales, and all across England, all ages, lots of different types of people, and it's been a really, really successful project. It officially closed in February of this year, and we worked with an evaluation team right from the beginning who did some incredible evaluation for us. We estimate a total direct reach over those 9 years of just over 200,000 people, and that's not counting things like social media and publications and print and YouTube videos and things like that, and this is just direct audience, and the depth and the breadth of engagement were really impressive. We realized that the outcomes were STEM related in terms of things like increasing subject knowledge, but also broader. There have been instances of people stating that they had increased confidence and that they'd enhanced their mental health and well-being because of doing astronomy and geophysics projects. So it was a really, really positive and celebratory project, and I'm in the process of writing that up as a kind of STEM paper for the wider community that might be peer reviewed and journaled eventually, depending on how that goes. But just a few highlights. We created a space badge with the girl guiding for the brownies, and last time we checked, more than 42,000 girls between sort of age of 8 and 11 had been awarded one of those badges in the UK. So that's quite an impressive set of statistics. Some of the legacy from that project is that we've recognized that wider outcomes can arise through engaging with communities that we don't normally engage with. We've been able to prioritize and re-specify targets via our strategy, which we're in the process of finalizing at the moment. We're going to disseminate our learning to other stakeholders, and we're in the process of exploring other potential areas of impact in this project. So I think the legacy has been a really important one as well, and working with those groups that we wouldn't normally work with has been really important, again, where we've realized that we bring the astronomy and geophysics expertise, but in order to really have any impact in EDI, you need to work and partner with those organizations who know their own audiences and who trust, whose customers trust the organization. So there's no point of us trying to tell a bunch of carers in Scotland what to do. They trust their organisation that they're part of, and we just bring the astronomy and geophysics along with us. So that was a part of a really positive part of EDI at the RAS, and it will impact our work going forwards because it's being written into our wider strategy at the moment. Slightly less positive, or maybe positive in the long run, I don't know, has been our anti-harassment progress. So up until 2016, if we were getting reports of harassment and bullying, a lot of it was a case-by-case basis, people coming to us to disclose problems. It led to, when we had a new RAS website being created, we had diversity section and an anonymous reporting form and a diversity monitoring form attached to it, which we didn't have before. We started doing something called harassment hotline at events, so people could anonymously ring a phone number if they needed to report something, or if they felt that they needed a bit more support. That phone number was one of my phone numbers. So coming at it from a diversity officer point of view was interesting, because I didn't always have the right training or the right support as a staff member of the RAS in order to deal with some of that stuff. So that's an interesting thing to think about if you're working with a diversity officer, you know, is that the right person to pick up those disclosures? But we did a lot of work with external partners again, for example, Prospect Union. The case-by-case basis stuff is still occurring, but because of the work we did, we decided to do the harassment and bullying survey, and the results and the actions that have come from that have been more powerful, I think, going forwards. So the actual survey ran in 2020. The initial aims were partly to do the survey because something like that hadn't been done before in our community, but we wanted to use the data from the survey to do things like update our code of conduct, be able to inform universities of what the environment officially is, you know, with that data as a backing, and use the data to promote positive workplace behaviour and a better working environment. So we thought we could use the data to challenge early bad behaviours, show people what's unacceptable, also show people that they are not alone and the RAS is there to support. And then we plan to get volunteers to form a focus group to analyse the data and create useful recommendations. Now, partly because the RAS is such an old organisation and because of the hierarchical structure, everything takes a long time. So the survey was in 2020. The report was written mostly in 2021. It hasn't been formally launched yet, but I have been talking about the results for a couple of years now, or almost a couple of years now, at NAM, and the first set of results did make some newspapers and Nature magazine and website, but we were aware that the stats are really bad, but the report in itself didn't tell us what to do about it. So I'll show you some of the stats, and then I'll show you the work that the working group has been doing, and I'll tell you what our next plan is. The evidence suggested from the data that high profile individual cases in A&G, that bullying and harassment occurs frequently, affecting the mental health, staff retention, and particularly affecting people from minority groups. Prior to our survey, no data had officially been captured for the UK. So understanding the experiences is really crucial for the future of our sector. And we really do hope that the results and the recommendations coming from it will influence leaders and funding bodies to shape a better environment for everyone. So the aims of the survey specifically were to capture, sort of a little snapshot into how bad, or how good, we didn't know at the time, how bad the situation was, understand which communities are most likely to be affected, and then have that baseline data to use as a starting point to affect change. So the initial findings showed that disabled, Black and minority ethnic astronomers and geophysicists are 40% more likely to be bullied than their non-disabled and white colleagues. Women and non-binary people are 50% more likely than men to be bullied and harassed. 50% of lesbian, gay, bisexual and queer astronomers were bullied. So when it says in the last 12 months, that's from 2020 back 12 months. And when it says in the last 2 years, that's from 2018 to 2020. And 12% of bisexual astronomers reported being bullied at least once a week. People of colour experience, 65% of people of colour experience bullying, harassment, and this was in the past 2 years, so 2018 to 2020. And you can see going down from that 65%, 63, 60, 53, etc. It's all minority groups that are reporting the most amount of bullying and harassment between 2018 and 2020. And we appreciate that it's not single cases, that it is intersectional as well. In some cases, we were able to do a bit of data analysis around the intersectional groups, but in others we weren't, just because there wasn't enough data to keep it anonymous. 43% of the people that did the survey experienced some type of bullying and harassment in the 12 months prior to the survey. And again, we appreciate that people might only fill in this kind of survey if they are affected, so that there might be some bias, but even so, the stats were really, really awful. People saying that that they'd had bullying and harassment cases repeatedly in the 2 years prior to 2020. It showed that non-binary and other genders fared the worst. Students also reported the highest levels, people on sort of temporary contracts and students and postdocs, and so people on permanent contracts and temporary contracts were able to say that they reported less. Older respondents experienced the least bullying and harassment. Disabled people experienced more. So red there is more than once, orange is once, and blues is not at all. The data suggests that Black, Asian and minority ethnic respondents were about 35% more likely to experience bullying and harassment. And we did try and pull out, at the time, BAME was a suitable acronym, and I know we don't use that as much anymore, but we did try and pull out as much data from that as we could. Again, without it losing the anonymity. And then 50% of gay and lesbian respondents and 47% of bi respondents experienced bullying and harassment in the 2 years leading up to the survey. Witnesses also were presenting with large numbers, and one of the key things we want to do is to make sure that people know that witnessing and reporting bullying and harassment events that you've witnessed is just as important and just as powerful as people reporting things that have happened to them. Because when I've spoken to students, people were saying that they didn't realize that they could report things if they'd witnessed it, or they weren't taken seriously just for witnessing something. But straight people reported witnessing the least amount in the last 2 years. 57% of people had witnessed unwanted behaviors. Astronomers and geophysicists between the ages of 25 and 44 are more likely to witness bullying and harassment than their younger or older colleagues. And then in terms of preventative measures and reporting in the workplace, we asked a bunch of questions, and some of the replies were surprising and not in a good way. So we asked, do you think your employer takes sufficient action to prevent bullying and harassment or unwanted behaviours at work? 37% of respondents said yes to this, 33% said no, and 27% said they weren't sure. 3% responded with other. So we had like a free text box as well, so people could explain their answers. Some of the positive examples included that in their workplaces there was clear communication and clear chains of command, and there were obvious reporting procedures in their workplace. But the types of reporting differs from the prevention, and many respondents mentioned that. And people thought that the existence of reporting procedures might deter perpetrators, although there wasn't evidence of this specifically. However, many more respondents had negative examples, so unclear reporting procedures at lots of different institutions. The hierarchical relationships, such as supervisor-student relationships, made reporting or whistleblowing difficult. Often people felt that the policies were not there to protect the staff or to prevent bullying and harassment, but they were there to cover the organizational back, so protect the universities or protect the company, rather than to protect the staff from these things happening. And people felt that that the people in power and the people that had positions of influence were invincible and weren't often punished. There was a lot of perception that there were no sanctions for those, particularly who secure large grants in universities. And some of the quotes were, "It's difficult to educate senior staff on their behaviour. Some individuals are not aware of the impact and do not believe they've done anything wrong." on paper they do, but they're always people in more powerful positions who don't treat students with respect, especially those who are struggling with a disability. A code of conduct exists, but one of the people who bullied me is one of the chairs in the committee in charge of upholding it. So it's really, really dire situation there, where, you know, the systems are completely broken. So reporting was a big issue. People were not generally satisfied with how reports were dealt with. A lot felt that they'd reported and then nothing happened, or there was no clear mechanism for reporting, or you know, people swept things under the carpet. And again, for that one, there wasn't enough data to disaggregate responses. So when we were analysing the report, we realised that even though at the beginning we thought that the data was the bit that was important, and it is good to have that data, what would be more important would be to create a set of actions and recommendations by the RAS and for the RAS and for the wider community. And so we set up a working group to work out what these recommendations should look like. Like I said, things take a lot of time. So we've only just, well, the last working group meeting is tomorrow, but we've met over May to August this year. Our chair was Charlotte Thorley, who's an independent freelance person working in EDI and public engagement. I was the staff lead, and then we had a mix of university representatives, people from UKRI, freelance, different ages, different backgrounds. So people from UK SEDS and people from the Institute of Physics as well. Shanice at the IOP is working on the new Juno model, and harassment and bullying is going to be taken into account for this. So it was really important that she was there. And Jonathan is part of the UKRI forum against bullying and harassment. And again, a really important link when we're talking about funding organisations and funding bodies. So we've created a set of recommendations similar to the LGBT plus survey actions. We split them into individuals, managers and workplaces. We realised that the three main areas to focus on were prevention, reporting and accountability. And we're hoping that when we launch the report, when we will also launch the recommendations and actions as an addendum, and the next thing that we do will be trying to implement those actions and recommendations, the one specific for the RAS but also to the wider community. So these are still work in progress, because we've got the meeting tomorrow, and then they'll have to go through council, go through your CDAG and council as well before anything's published. But you can see that we've got a lot fewer recommendations for individuals, because the burden of blame shouldn't be on victims or individuals. But what individuals do need to do is educate themselves by doing training, by realizing what harassment and bullying is, and by being better allies for people. In terms of management and leading, this is all specifically for prevention. We've got a mix of recommendations that people can do. A lot of it's about training and learning opportunities in terms of prevention, but things like having strong and actionable code of conduct, challenging power dynamics, make sure that staff have clear expectations around workplace culture and how bullying and harassment arises, so that feeds in again to training. For reporting, finding out what your reporting options are, take up so from a management point of view, take the cases seriously, ensure that there's ensure that there is a proper point of contact, I can't talk today, a proper point of contact for reporting issues. So know who receives those reports, make sure the person that receives those reports is qualified to do so and knows what to do with them. In terms of organisations, have lots of reviews of membership of panels, terms and conditions, timelines. One of the things we talked about as a working group was that at the moment, if you're in a university and something goes to a panel, a bullying, a harassment panel, that's an internal panel, and that's when the issues can occur in terms of perpetrators could be on those panels, as we've seen from one of those quotes. So it was suggested that maybe an independent panel could be set up across our community that people can report to and people can feel safer reporting to, because it's made up of people that are not within your university. And then when I presented this at NAM, someone suggested that in the same way that you have external PhD Viva examiners, maybe we should have external panels and do panels for each other, so that, for example, I'm just picking Leicester, there'll be a panel at Leicester University, but they cover disclosures for Lancaster University, and Lancaster's panel cover Sussex's, and so that way you're taking away any of the barriers of reporting that staff and employees might face. In terms of accountability, this was a bit harder, but we talked a lot about working with the new Juno model for sort of external badging of anti-bullying and harassment status, so that you're shown to be an anti-bullying and harassment university, or whatever your organisation is. If you're an organisation, have consequences that are time bound and obvious to individuals and groups. Work with other organisations to ensure consequences have wider impact, and maybe some kind of reward scheme if staff are active allies and or actively involved in anti-bullying and harassment processes. And we're sort of still working on those 3 areas, but those are for the wider community. We also wanted to have quite specific objectives for the RAS going forwards. First one is to disseminate the report and recommendations. We've also got a Nature Astronomy article that will be launched at the same time. We really wanted to lead by example, and we're definitely going to pick some of those recommendations to make sure we work on. But we wanted to do things like work with one particular university as a pilot to see how the wider recommendations might be impacted, put in repeat the survey in a few years' time, regroup the working group in 1 year, 2 years and 3 years to check on the progress, and make sure we have relevant staff training, work with, for example, UKRI to see if there could be barriers to funding for perpetrators. Other things like work with, so we've obviously got a publishing strand of the RAS, so work with the Committee on Publication Ethics, I think is the acronym's COPE. So we've come across a couple of situations where we've published papers with authors or co-authors who are known perpetrators, and that is fitting with the COPE guidelines, but it doesn't seem like a very nice thing to do or a good thing to do. So maybe in the future we can work with the COPE COPE to change the rules around who can publish their work, and also act as an organisation for other people to help prevent or report bullying and harassment where possible. So again, have this kind of external reporting process. We wanted to do something more around keeping our members safe at conferences as well. We're thinking on how we can do that, and sort of making sure NAMs in the future are safer places, and we work with previous NAM organisers and future NAM organisers to make that more joined up. I do have a Padlet that's open if you wanted to add anything in terms of the aims and objectives. You're absolutely free to do so. I think that's, yeah, so I'll leave that there for a minute. I know I've absolutely flown through lots and lots of information, so if there were any questions or comments or anything, please feel free to ask me.